Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S Study Circle. Now we give you a mains question assignment from the DNS every Thursday. So in our weekly series of these mains question assignments from the DNS, the question for today's assignment is: what are the various aspects of the debate regarding the issue of menstrual leave? Highlight the need for making provisions for menstrual leave, and the answer is to be provided within 250 words word limit. Now this question has been created from the DNS of 21st August 2020 and it is related to the social issues topic. So you can write your answers and post them in the comment section and they will be evaluated if you have posted them before Saturday. And the link for this question has been provided in the description below. So do click on that link and write your answers on the ELEARN platform. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 22nd October 2020. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. And before going through this discussion, you should attempt this self-assessment test, and the answers for which have been given at the end of this video. Now this article on page number 6 has been written in the context of the recent agreements that were signed between Israel and the UAE and the Bahrain. And these were famously called as the Abraham Accords. And about them we have already learned in the previous DNS videos. However, this article analyzes that the United States of America in its foreign policy has not factored in the geopolitical consequences of its declining influence in the Middle Eastern region. And in this background, this article analyzes the way in which United States of America has dealt with the Middle Eastern region in the past through its foreign policy. And in this, he has particularly emphasized on the Obama era and has compared that with the steps taken by the Donald Trump administration. And finally, we will look at what are the likely implications of the US's declining influence in the region. Further, the Abraham Accords that were signed between Israel, UAE and Bahrain were signed by the mediation of the US administration. And this signing of Abraham Accords between Israel and the Arab countries, which were always in conflict related to the Palestinian issue, is being touted as a victory for the Trump administration's foreign policy. However, the author has said that the Trump's foreign policy has failed in various other instances. So let us first look at the areas in which the foreign policy of Trump administration has failed in the recent past. So in this regard, the author says that the Trump administration's foreign policy has failed with regards to Afghanistan. And in this, the United States of America has agreed to collaborate with Taliban for the peace deal after a long war. So this shows a kind of compromise on the part of Trump administration. Further, the outreach of the US to the North Korea has also failed and has not been able to bring out any positive result. Besides this, the Trump administration touted the deal of century between Israelis and the Palestinians, and it also did not yield any kind of positive result. Further, the US is indulged in trade war with China, and in that also it has failed to produce any structural shift in the way China is doing its business in the global economy. So all these instances highlight that the Trump administration has failed with regards to its foreign policy, especially with regards to Afghanistan, the North Korea, the Israel-Palestine, and also while dealing with China. So in this background, these Israel-Arab agreements or the Abraham Accords are being seen as a victory of the Trump administration's foreign policy. However, the author says that the United States of America should accept that its influence is declining in the Middle Eastern region, and accordingly, it should plan for its foreign policy. So in this background, let us first look at the way in which the Obama administration had dealt with the Middle Eastern region and how it reflected upon the realities of the Middle Eastern region. Now, during the first term of the Obama administration, the United States of America was stuck in an unwinnable war with Iraq that was getting stretched beyond time. Secondly, America also ventured in the conflict that was happening in Syria. However, its presence was checkmated by the Russians. That is, that is the US presence or the ability of US to influence the outcome of the Syrian war, was highly influenced by the Russian presence. And this shows a declining influence of US in the Syria. Thirdly, its intervention in Libya also turned out to be disastrous. And further, Obama administration tried to stifle the Iranian government. However, it continued to be defiant despite threats of sanctions by the US administration. Besides this, the America was not able to control the Israel, and also it had upset its Arab allies, for example, the Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc. However, after the first term of the Obama administration got over, it realized that the US should resize its presence in the region and should now pivot to East Asia, where China was steadily on the rise. However, this resizing could not take place because it was not easy for America to exit from the Middle Eastern region and the controversies in which it was embroiled. And finally, realizing the drawback of its own presence in the region, some initiatives were taken by the Obama administration in its second term, and they included the nuclear deal with Iran, and that brought peace between Iran and United States of America. Secondly, United States of America accepted the Russian role in Syria. And while signing this nuclear deal with Iran, the United States of America had ignored the Saudi Arabia and the Israel's concern. And that is because we note that these are the two warring powers in the Middle Eastern region. That is, there's a conflict between Saudi Arabia and the Iran, and at the same time, the Arab countries and the Israel are also at conflict related to the Palestinian issue. Further, the US administration in the Obama's second term overlooked the Israeli occupation in the Palestine, and also they sided with the Saudi Arabia in the Yemen. So this shows that the US administration in the Obama's second term had balanced its interests in the Middle Eastern region. And this is reflected by the US's signing of the nuclear deal with Iran, and that had brought concerns for the Saudi Arabia and Israel. However, at the same time, it managed things with Israel and Saudi Arabia by overlooking the Israeli occupation in the Palestinian region and also by siding with Saudi Arabia in the Yemen crisis. And this policy of the Obama administration in the second term was called as the plan to let the regional players to establish cold peace among themselves. So by comparing both the terms of the Obama administration, we find that in the first term, the Obama administration did not factor in the reality of the Middle Eastern region and the reality that its influence was declining. However, in the second term, this issue was resolved and the foreign policy of the US administration was balanced in the Middle Eastern region. However, in the Trump era, things are again out of control of the US administration. And in this regard, the Trump administration has demolished the Iran nuclear deal. Again, it has brought Israel back to center of America's policy towards the region. Further, the Trump administration has prompted the Arab and the Jewish allies of the US to join hands, and this is reflected in the Abraham Accords. So all these steps taken by the Trump administration reflect that they aimed at remaking the regional dynamics in favor of America's allies and at the same time pushing the rivals to corner. So we see that America has now aligned with its partners in the region, that is, they have aligned with Israel and have accepted the Israel's presence in the Palestine. And at the same time, they have now prompted for peace between Arab and Jewish allies, and they have tried to corner Iran by pulling out of the Iran deal. However, doing this, the Trump administration has failed to realize that its influence in the region is on a decline. So now let us look at the miscalculation that was undertaken by the United States of America in Iran. Now, the implicit goal of the United States of America while pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal was creating some kind of deterrence. And while pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, the Trump administration had thought that they could extract more concessions from Iran and also cut the regional allies of the Iran by putting or reimposing the sanctions. However, the Iran did not bow down and it responded with multiple cuts on the US and its allies. And it did so by targeting the Saudi oil facilities, and you might be knowing that Iran had attacked two of the oil facilities of the Saudi Aramco. Further, Iran has also targeted the cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz, which is also one of the strategic choke points in the Persian Gulf. And again, Iran has been involved in the proxy war by launching rocket attacks at American troops in Iraq, and which has led US to think of moving out its embassy from Iraq. However, in response to the Iran's aggressiveness, the US in its response got Qasem Soleimani, who was one of the top Iranian generals, killed. And doing this, the US declared that it has re-established deterrence vis-a-vis Iran. However, such policies of Trump administration has not created any kind of deterrence in the region, and this is visible in the rocket attacks by Iran-backed Shia rebels in Iraq, and now the US administration is contemplating shutting down the American embassy in Iraq in Baghdad. Further changing its stance on the Israel issue, the United States has now adopted the policy of embracing the Israel in the Middle Eastern region. And in this regard, the US has now decided to move its American embassy to Jerusalem, which is a point of conflict in the Israel or in the Middle Eastern region. Again, the America has also recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights and has also given its go-ahead to the annexation of Israel's Jewish settlements in the West Bank, which is claimed by the Palestine. So this shows that the American foreign policy in the Middle Eastern region has now moved away from a balanced view towards embracing the Israel. And this particularly has sharpened the geopolitical contradictions in the region instead of bringing peace in the Middle East. So in this regard, the author says that even though America is claiming its victory by signing the deals between Arab countries and the Israel, it will not put an end to the Palestinian issue that is going on between Israel and Palestine. Further, by bringing peace between the Arab countries and the Israel, the United States of America is leaving a vacuum in the regional politics, and this will be exploited or filled by the non-Arab Muslim countries like Turkey and Iran. And they will now claim themselves to be the champions of the Palestinian cause, and this is further going to aggravate the conflict in the Middle Eastern region. So according to author, this change in the policy of the US administration from the Obama to the Trump era, and especially with regards to Iran and Israel, reflect the declining influence of the United States of America in the region. And the question that needs to be asked is that, is the United States of America prepared to face the geopolitical consequences of the decline of its influence in West Asia? So the author hopes that the Trump administration, if it comes to power for the second term, corrects the issues or the wrongs that it has done in the foreign policy relating to the Middle Eastern region. So we see that this article has touched different aspects of the Middle Eastern region and various issues. And this gives us a good insight into the major issues that are happening in the Middle Eastern region, and hence it is important from the mains examination point of view. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 6 is about the recent government's decision to waive off merchant discount rate charges on the transactions that are done through the RuPay and the Beam UPI payments in order to provide a push to digital payments. However, such a move of the government has had a negative impact on the payment ecosystem, and this has been reflected in terms of hampering of innovation, job losses, and also slowdown in the expansion of digital payment infrastructure in India. So now you might be knowing that a question was asked in the preliminary examination of 2018 related to the merchant discount rate. And in this background, let us understand the payment and settlement system in India and what kind of payments come under the RBI and the NPCI. That can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And after that, let us understand the issues with the MDR and what are the positives and the negatives of the government's decision. And this can be important for us from economy point of view in the preliminary examination, and also some of the points can be used in mains examination in General Studies paper 3. Now regarding the payment and the settlement system, you might be knowing that this is a system that facilitates transfer of money from payer to the beneficiary. And this payment system includes both paper-based payments such as checks, drafts, as well as electronic payment systems, for example, the RTGS, NEFT, or the IMPS and UPI. So this is basically all about the payment and settlement system of India. Now in this context, some kinds of payment systems come under RBI, while others are under the NPCI or the National Payments Corporation of India. Now, regarding those payment systems that come under the RTI, they include the RTGS or the Real Time Gross Settlement System, and also the NEFT or the National Electronics Fund Transfer System. And the RTGS system is used for high value transactions and in which the minimum transaction amount should be about rupees 2 lakhs or above. Further, regarding the National Payments Corporation of India, you should note that it is an umbrella organization for operating retail payments and settlement systems. And it is also an initiative of RBI and the Indian Banks Association or the IBA. So basically, it is dealing with the retail payments and the settlement systems. Now, what are the key initiatives of the National Payments Corporation of India or the NPCI? So these include the RuPay contactless payment, then the Unified Payment Interface, the Bheem app, Bharat Bill Pay, Immediate Payment System or the National Financial Switch and the Bharat QR Code. Now regarding the RuPay contactless, you should note that it allows the card holders to wave their card in front of the contactless payment terminals without the need of physically swiping or inserting the card in the point of sale device. Further, regarding UPI, you might all be knowing that it is the real-time interbank payment system for sending or receiving of money. Regarding Bheem, it is a mobile app for UPI and the Bheem has 3 levels of authentication. Regarding the Bharat Bill Pay, it is one-stop ecosystem for payments of all the bills. Regarding immediate payment system, you should note that it is the real-time interbank payment system. And regarding the National Financial Switch, you should note that it is the network of ATMs in India. And this question was asked in 2018 that the National Financial Switch is managed by. So the answer was NCPI. And then there is Bharat QR code, which is a common QR code which is built for easing the payments. Now, besides these, there are other card networks that are operated by the non-banks, and these include the Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc. So this is all about the payments and the settlement system that exists in India and which is under the control of RBI or the NCPI and also the Visa, MasterCard and in American Express. So we have seen that this article was related to one of the government's initiative that was related to the merchant discount rate charges. And the decision was that in December 2019, the government decided to waive off the MDR charges or the merchant discount rate charges on the transactions that are done through the RuPay and the Bheem UPI payments, and this was done in order to push the digital payments. So now the merchant discount rate is simply a fee that is charged for the merchants by the banks for accepting the payments from the customers through either the credit cards, debit cards or QR codes in their establishments. And the merchant discount rate is expressed in percentage terms, and this charge is in turn distributed among 3 stakeholders. First are the customers' bank, second is the merchants' bank, and third is the payment system operator, which can include Visa, MasterCard, NPCI, RuPay or the Bharat QR code. So this is basically the fee that is charged for the merchants by the banks, and this is done for accepting the payments from the customers. And for those payments that are done through the credit card, debit cards or the QR codes. And the fees that is charged from the merchants in the form of MDR is distributed among 3 stakeholders, which include the customer's bank, the merchant's bank and the payments operator. And in this, the payment system operator can include the Visa, MasterCard, NPCI, RuPay, Bharat QR code, etc. So again, coming back to the decision of the government of India that it has now decided to waive off the MDR charges on transactions that are done through RuPay and the Bheem UPI payments. And in this, the government has indicated that the RBI will absorb these costs from the savings that will accrue on the account of handling less cash as people move to these digital modes of payments. Now, in this regard, the government aims that by doing away with the MDR charges on the RuPay and the Bheem UPI, it will give a push to the digital payment ecosystem. So basically, when the people move towards the digital modes of payment, it will lead to some kind of savings for the RBI because it will now have to handle less cash. And accordingly, the RBI will be able to absorb the costs from the savings that accrue because of less handling of cash. Now, what are the positives of this decision of the government of India? So it aims at bringing down the cost of digital payments that are done through the RuPay and the Bheem UPI. Secondly, it encourages the adoption of indigenously developed payment tools. We note that RuPay and Bheem and UPI are developed by the NPCI, which is Indian or is indigenously developed. Third is that it aims to promote cashless economy and also aims at nudging other payment operators such as the Visa, Mastercard, etc. And by pushing more competition in the payment systems, it aims at bringing down the commissions that are charged by the Visa, Mastercard, etc. So these are some of the expected positive outcomes because of the government's decision. After this, let us look at what are the negatives with the government's initiative. First is that it will bring financial burden on the RBI to the tune of rupees 1800 crores. Also, it will lead to losses for the NPCI. Further, many of the banks have already shifted to other payment service providers, for example, the Visa and MasterCard, in order to earn commissions on their digital payments. And besides this, there are a number of fintech companies, for example, the Paytm or the Google Pay, etc., and they have integrated the UPI into their apps for facilitating the digital payments. So, as the government has waived these merchant discount charges through the UPI, it would lead to reduced profits and will discourage innovation and hurt the fintech sector. And this is because most of the fintech companies have now integrated the UPI with themselves. For example, the Paytm and the Google Pay have integrated the UPI. And now the money that is charged on the merchants will not be distributed among these fintech companies, and as such, it will discourage innovation. And this zero MDR charges would prevent the growth of fintech companies because their profits will now be reduced because most of them have integrated themselves with the UPI, etc., on which the government has waived off the MDR charges. So, in this regard, some recommendations by the committees that have been formed on the digital payments are important. And in this, the Committee on Digital Payments that was initiated under the chairmanship of Ratan Wattal has recommended that the MDR or the merchant discount rate should be high enough for new players to be incentivized to enter the digital payment ecosystem and low enough that merchants are encouraged to adopt digital payments. So it aims at striking a kind of balance between both the requirements of encouraging new players and at the same time not discouraging the merchants to adopt the digital payments. And the Nandan Nilekani committee has recommended that the MDR should be market determined and there should be no role of the government in this regard. So while concluding, the author says that the government should provide for a lower MDR on the QR codes, UPIs or the RuPay debit card, etc. And this should be accompanied by a tax incentives to merchants who accept the electronic transactions and should promote incentive schemes to improve the popularity of the QR code transactions in India. So basically, the merchants should be prompted to adopt the digital payment systems, and at the same times, the merchant discount rates should not be waived off so that the innovations by the fintech companies are not discouraged. So these are few aspects of the merchant discount rate and the impact of the government's decision regarding waiving off of the MDR from the RuPay and the Bheem UPI. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 is related to the state of manual scavenging workers in India. And although the government of India has passed various laws for improving the condition of the sanitation workers, these sanitation workers continue to face stigma and they are devoid of the essential rights. So in this article, let us understand the status of the sanitation workers in India. What are the steps that have been taken by the government in this regard to improve their situation, and specifically the two acts that have been passed by the government of India for improving the conditions of these sanitation workers. And after that, let us look at the two bodies that have been created for improving the conditions of the sanitation workers. And some of the points that we are going to discuss here can be used in answering questions in the General Studies paper 2 in the topic social issues. So now some facts and data related to the status of sanitation workers in India. First is that according to the National Commission of Safai Karmcharis, a total of 53,598 people, and out of which almost 30,000 people are in Uttar Pradesh alone, have been identified as engaged in manual scavenging in the year 2018. So this shows that a large number of people are still engaged in the inhuman practice of manual scavenging as of 2018. And out of the total 54,000 people engaged in manual scavenging in India, around 30,000 of them are in Uttar Pradesh alone. Secondly, although the construction of dry latrines has drastically reduced, the number of deaths in the manholes, sewers, and the septic tanks continues to be high or continues to remain high. So, the construction of dry latrines, which was the biggest cause of the practice of manual scavenging, has reduced drastically. However, even now, many of the sanitation workers are involved in the manholes, sewers, and septic tanks cleaning, and the death of such people who are involved in cleaning of manholes, sewers, and septic tanks is still high. Now, in this regard, the Government of India had plans to amend the 2013 Act related to manual scavenging, and through this, it aims to completely mechanize the cleaning of sewers, manholes, and also aims at building new sewers. However, neither the past amendments to the 2013 Act and nor the present proposed amendments address the issue of labor safety of the people who are engaged in the cleanings of the manholes, sewers, and the septic tanks. Further, the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan does not address the issue of labor rights, and still stigma is attached to the people who are indulged in the sanitation jobs. And unlike other labor forces, the sanitation workers do not have a separate rule book that lays down the guidelines for their working timings, holidays, a proper place for their roll call, or removal from the duty. So, these highlight that the condition of the sanitation workers in India is highly vulnerable. And still, the inhuman practice of manual scavenging exists in certain areas, and also the rights of the sanitation workers have not been properly taken care of in India. Now, to improve the condition of the sanitation workers, the Government of India enacted the Employment of Manual Scavengers and Construction of Dry Latrines Prohibition Act in 1993. And this act prohibits the employment of manual scavengers or manual cleaning of sewers and septic tanks without protective equipments and the construction of insanitary latrines. So, these are the main provisions of the 1993 Act. Further, this act seeks to rehabilitate the manual scavengers and also provides for their alternative employment. Again, each local authority or the cantonment board or the railway authority is responsible for surveying the insanitary latrines within its jurisdiction. And they shall also construct a number of sanitary community latrines, and it provided for an imprisonment of up to an year or fine for employing people in the manual scavenging process. However, despite making some serious efforts for removing the menace or the inhuman practice of manual scavenging, there are certain shortcomings in this act. And this act defines a manual scavenger as a person who is engaged in or employed for manually carrying the human excreta. And this excludes a sanitation worker who is entering a manhole from the ambit of this law. So basically, it only addresses one issue that is related to manual scavenging. However, it does not exclude the sanitation workers who are entering the manholes for cleaning, etc. Further, the Act defines dry latrine as a latrine other than a water seal latrine. However, issue here is that the manual scavenging is not just restricted to the dry latrines, and it also exists in the insanitary latrines as well as the open defecation. So this means that the definition of manual scavenging is not wide enough, and this does not include people who are engaged in the septic tanks, etc., and also those people who are involved in the cleaning of open defecations. Then in the year 2013, the Parliament of India passed the Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act. And this act seeks to prohibit manual scavenging in all forms and ensures the rehabilitation of manual scavengers that are to be identified through a mandatory survey. Now, what are the key features of this act? So, it prohibits construction and maintenance of insanitary toilets. Secondly, it prohibits the engagement or employment of anyone as manual scavengers. And if this provision is violated, it can result in an year's imprisonment or a fine of rupees 50,000 or both. Further, it prohibits a person from being engaged or employed for hazardous cleaning of a sewer, and it also includes various offences related to manual scavenging that are cognizable and non-bailable. And finally, it calls for a survey of manual scavengers in urban and rural India within a time-bound framework. So this 2013 Act is an improvement over the 1993 Act, and in this regard, it prohibits the construction and maintenance of insanitary latrines, etc., and the quantum of punishment has also been increased. So after looking at the acts that have been passed for improving the sanitation workers' conditions, let us look at these two bodies. First is the National Commission of Safai Karmcharis, and it was constituted in 1994 as a statutory body through an act of parliament. Now this act lapsed in 2004, and again this commission is now acting as a non-statutory body of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Non-statutory in the sense that it has not been created by the Act of Parliament. Second body is the National Safai Karmcharis Finance and Development Corporation, or the NSKFDC. Now it is a wholly owned Government of India undertaking, and it works under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Now it was set up in 1997 as a not-for-profit company under the Section 25 of the Companies Act 1956. Further, it is an apex corporation for the all-round socio-economic development of the Safai Karmcharis, scavengers and their dependents throughout India. It is also the nodal agency for the implementation of the Central Sector Self-Employment Scheme for rehabilitation of manual scavengers, and which is under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And finally, it plays a vital role in elimination of manual scavenging. So these are the two bodies that have been created for the upliftment of the Safai Karmcharis or the sanitation workers. However, the National Commission for Safai Karmchari is not a statutory organization and is neither a constitutional body. And that is why its powers and authorities are limited in nature. So these are few aspects related to the sanitation workers' conditions in India and some of the steps taken by the Government of India. With this, let's take up the next news. Now this article on page number 10 reads that the Jammu and Kashmir District Council polls soon. And in this regard, the Union Cabinet has approved the adoption of Panchayati Raj Act for the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So in this regard, the Union Cabinet has approved the adoption of Jammu and Kashmir Panchayati Raj Act of 1989. And this act was amended and notified by the Union Home Ministry recently. And according to the government, this move will help establish all the 3 tiers of grassroots level democracy in the Union Territory, like in other parts of our India. So in this regard, a natural question arises that although we have the 73rd Amendment Act which deals with the Panchayati Raj, why was there a need of separate Jammu and Kashmir Panchayati Raj Act of 1989 being notified now? And also, under what authority has the Ministry of Home Affairs amended the Jammu and Kashmir Panchayati Raj Act of 1989? So let us look at these aspects from our preliminary examination point of view under the topic Indian Polity and Governance. So in this regard, let us understand why is there a separate law for the Panchayati Raj institutions in Jammu and Kashmir, and why has the Ministry of Home Affairs amended this particular act. So now, even though we had 73rd constitutional amendment that deals with the Panchayati Raj institutions, the 3-tier system was not established in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And this was not implemented in Jammu and Kashmir because of the special status that it enjoyed under the Indian Constitution according to the Article 370. And as the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act was not applicable to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the local governance in J&K continued to operate under the Jammu and Kashmir Panchayati Raj Act of 1989. Now we note that Jammu and Kashmir has been under the central rule since June 2018 because the Article 370 has now been abrogated. And now the state of Jammu and Kashmir has been converted into a union territory. So in this regard, this Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019 enabled the Ministry of Home Affairs to amend the Union Territories laws by issuing an order. So this empowers the Ministry of Home Affairs to have control over the laws that are passed by the legislature of the Union Territory. So as this law of Jammu and Kashmir Panchayati Raj Act of 1989 still holds, the Ministry of Home Affairs has amended it and has now made it a 3-tier system. Now what are the amendments that have been done by the Ministry of Home Affairs? First is that it seeks to create the district development councils whose members will be directly elected by the people. Second is that these district development councils shall consist of directly elected members from the territorial constituencies in the district. Secondly, it will include the members of the Legislative Assembly that represent a part or whole of this district. And it will include those Legislative Assembly members whose constituencies are there within the district. And also it will consist of the chairperson of all the block development council of the district. Further, all the DDC members, whether or not elected by direct elections from the territorial constituencies in the district, shall have the right to vote in the meeting of the district development council. However, the members of the legislative assemblies will have no voting rights in case of election or the removal of the chairman or the vice chairman. So the rights of the MLAs for voting for the removal and the election of chairman and vice chairman has been restricted to an extent. And only the directly elected members will have the right to vote in the case of election or removal of chairman or vice chairman. So these are few points which are important for us from preliminary examination point of view because they are related to the governance of Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So here we conclude today's discussion. These are the answers for the self-assessment test, and after this let us take up the question for the day.